May 1st, 1945, 10:26 in the evening. A radio receiver crackles in a cellar beneath Hamburg, where 17 souls are squeezed together, their faces dimly lit by flickering candlelight. Electricity is a rare luxury, available for a mere 2 hours each night, if fortune smiles. Tonight, it seems, fortune is on their side. Admiral Dönitz's voice, measured and formal, pierces the static, announcing the demise of Adolf Hitler. The Führer, it is stated, perished the previous afternoon in Berlin, bravely confronting the onslaught of Bolshevism to his final breath, leading his soldiers in the defense of the capital. "The Führer has fallen," the pronouncement declares. "Long live Germany!" A silence, profound and absolute, descends for 3 long seconds after the announcement concludes. Not a soul in that Hamburg basement utters a sound. Then, Frau Richter, a woman in her 60s, whose son fell at Stalingrad 3 years prior, whispers with quiet intensity, "Good." Her daughter clutches her arm, paralyzed by the fear that someone might have overheard. 2 doors away, in another subterranean refuge, a solitary sob breaks the quiet. These are not the unified responses of a single nation. They are the echoes of a country fractured into countless individual calculations for survival, each person isolated with their gnawing hunger, their deep-seated fear, and their memories of what they once held true just 6 years ago, 1 year ago, or even yesterday. In Berlin, 31-year-old Ruth Andreas Friedrich receives the news in her apartment in Schmargendorf. For 3 years, she has harbored Jews within her home, a vital part of a clandestine network dedicated to distributing anti-Nazi pamphlets and fabricating identity documents. That night, she confides in her diary, "Hitler is dead." We exchange glances in silence. Could it truly be? Is this dreadful ordeal finally concluding? Yet, her sense of relief is overshadowed by the grim reality. Soviet artillery now lies 2 miles distant. The city is engulfed in flames, and her district is devoid of water, electricity, and any food provisions. Hitler's passing changes nothing about the impending morning, when she must venture out into the streets, stepping over the fallen, in search of a loaf of bread. The broadcast message trickles through a nation that, by May of 1945, scarcely resembles a unified entity. Germany is no longer a singular state, but 1,000 fragmented remnants. In the western regions, American and British forces have secured all territory up to and beyond the Rhine River. To the east, Soviet armies command dominion over the lands stretching to the Oder River. In the intervening territory, a rapidly diminishing zone still under German authority, millions of refugees are caught in a westward exodus, desperately clinging to what little they can carry, abandoning all else. The news of Hitler's death reaches them in fragments, passed from one person to another, frequently distorted, often met with skepticism. In a Bavarian village that has been under American occupation for a fortnight, Matilda Wolf-Monkenberg, a mother of 6 in her 60s, learns of the event from a neighbor who heard it from yet another person. She refuses to believe it, dismissing it as Allied propaganda, another ruse designed to erode German morale. When an American soldier confirms the news the following day, she feels utterly numb. "I can no longer feel anything," she writes to her children. "We are beyond sensation. We simply exist from one hour to the next." Her dwelling remains intact, a stroke of fortune many do not share. Her city, Hamburg, was subjected to devastating firebombing in 1943. For 3 days after those raids, she navigated streets where the asphalt had melted, where individuals were fused to the very pavement, and where 40,000 lives were extinguished in a single night. Hitler's demise is merely another stark detail in an overwhelming cascade of tragedies, too immense to fully comprehend. However, in another sector of Bavaria, in a hamlet that will remain unoccupied for another 3 days, a different reaction unfolds. 16-year-old Hans Schmidt weeps upon hearing the announcement. He has been a devoted member of the Hitler Youth since the tender age of 10, possessing the unwavering conviction of adolescence that the Führer would engineer a miraculous turn of events, that the fabled wonder weapons would materialize, and that the tide of war would ultimately reverse. His father, who lost an arm during the Great War at Verdun, and has observed this second global conflict with somber recognition, places a hand on his son's shoulder, offering no words. There is nothing to say. The boy will learn. We all learn, eventually. The complexity of these diverse reactions cannot be reduced to simplistic terms. This is not a chronicle of a nation either celebrating its liberation or lamenting a fallen leader. It is a narrative of profound exhaustion, widespread confusion, pervasive fear, and the peculiar emotional void that accompanies enduring catastrophic events. In Berlin, the very epicenter of the announcement, the majority of the populace remains unaware of the news. The city has endured a brutal 2-week siege, with Soviet forces controlling 3/4 of the capital. The remaining German defenders, a disarrayed amalgamation of Wehrmacht remnants, SS units, Hitler Youth, and elderly Volkssturm men, cling to isolated pockets of resistance. Most civilians are confined to cellars, venturing out only when absolutely essential. Radio reception is erratic. Information disseminates through whispers and rumors. Ursula von Kardorf, a journalist who remained in Berlin throughout the siege, hears the announcement on May 2nd, a day late, relayed by someone who received it from another. She records in her diary, "So, it is over. I feel nothing. Perhaps later I will feel something. For now, there is only the pressing question of whether we will survive the coming days." Her apartment building has been struck by artillery 3 times. The woman residing in the flat below hers was killed the previous day by shrapnel while attempting to procure water. Hitler's death holds relevance only insofar as it might hasten the cessation of hostilities. This context shapes every individual reaction. Immediate physical peril, immediate physical need. Germany, in May of 1945, is a land where simply surviving from sunrise to sunset constitutes a significant achievement. The announcement itself is meticulously crafted. Dönitz refrains from stating that Hitler committed suicide. Instead, he declares that Hitler died in combat. This is a fabrication, yet it is a deliberate falsehood intended to preserve a semblance of dignity, a shred of meaning. In the Hamburg cellar, when Frau Richter utters, "Good," her response is a distillation of 12 years under Nazi rule. The profound sorrow of her son's death, the utter devastation of her city, and the stark realization that this war had been irrevocably lost 2 years prior, yet inexplicably continued, claiming millions of additional lives in vain. When her daughter instinctively grasps her arm in fear, she is reacting to the chilling reality that even now, with Soviet and American forces occupying half the nation, pockets of fervent believers still exist who might report her for defeatism, or SS officers who might execute her for undermining morale. Both reactions are entirely rational, stemming from the same oppressive regime, the same cataclysm, the same pivotal moment. Germany in May of 1945 encompasses a multitude of experiences. In the Eastern Territories, already under Soviet occupation, the announcement carries a different weight. In a Pomeranian town occupied for 6 weeks, German civilians have endured their gravest fears. The Red Army's advance through eastern Germany had been marked by widespread atrocities, including mass rape, widespread looting, and indiscriminate killings. Estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of German women were subjected to sexual violence by Soviet soldiers in 1945. Within this harrowing context, Hitler's death is rendered inconsequential. The anonymous author of A Woman in Berlin, a diary published years later, records the announcement with a stark, single sentence. "So he is dead." It changes nothing for us. She is 34 years old, sharing a cellar with 8 other women, striving to remain unseen, to simply endure. The preceding week, she, like most of the women she knows, had been raped by Soviet soldiers. They have devised survival strategies, seeking protection from a Soviet officer who will claim them as his own, bartering sexual favors for sustenance, remaining concealed whenever possible, and moving in groups. The news of Hitler's demise offers no solace for these immediate, life-threatening concerns. The war will either conclude or persist. The soldiers will depart or they will remain. Whether she and the women with her will survive remains an open question. Hitler's relevance has evaporated. This is not a display of callousness, but rather the perspective of individuals existing in a state of primal survival, where societal structures have completely disintegrated, and each day is a precarious negotiation with utter chaos. Conversely, in Western Germany, in areas under American or British control, the reactions diverge. The occupation has been relatively orderly, with isolated incidents of looting and unrest, but nothing comparable to the East. In these regions, Hitler's death elicits a response closer to introspective reflection. In Frankfurt, occupied by American forces since late March, Wilhelm Müller, a 52-year-old schoolteacher, receives the news and experiences a complex admixture of relief and profound shame. He had joined the Nazi Party in 1937, not out of fervent conviction, but out of pragmatic necessity for his career advancement. He imparted the mandated curriculum, led his students in the ritualistic Hitler salutes, and prominently displayed the Führer's portrait in his classroom. He did not resist. He did not voice dissent. He survived by conforming. Now, with Hitler dead, Wilhelm must confront the consequences of his acquiescence. The Americans have begun exhibiting films documenting the horrors of the concentration camps. The previous week, he witnessed footage from Bergen-Belsen projected onto a sheet in the town square, a mandatory viewing for all adults. The emaciated bodies stacked like firewood, the survivors resembling walking specters, the mass graves. He had known of the camp's existence, as did everyone. However, he had not truly grasped the extent of the depravity, or perhaps he had deliberately shielded himself from the truth. The distinction now feels utterly meaningless. Upon hearing of Hitler's death, his initial thought is one of finality. His second thought is a stark question. What have we done? These thoughts will remain with him for the remainder of his days. This form of reaction, this confrontation with personal complicity, is more prevalent in the West, where the immediate threat to existence is less acute, affording individuals the mental space to begin processing the unfathomable events. Yet, even here, responses are remarkably varied. In the same town, Anna Becker, a 28-year-old woman, receives the announcement and experiences only unadulterated relief. Her husband was executed by the Gestapo in 1943 for distributing anti-war leaflets. For 2 years, she has lived in constant fear, raising their daughter alone, perpetually anticipating her own apprehension. Hitler's death signifies the imminent collapse of the very system that claimed her husband's life. For the first time in years, she allows herself to harbor hope that this nightmare might finally be drawing to a close. When she informs her 6-year-old daughter that the Führer is dead, the child innocently inquires, "Does this mean Papa is coming home?" Anna must gently reiterate that Papa is not returning, that he will never return. Hitler's demise does not reverse the finality of death. In the rural areas, far removed from the urban centers where the war's impact was less direct, the reactions are again different. In a secluded village within the Black Forest, untouched by aerial bombardment, where the war is merely a palpable absence of young men, Josef, a 70-year-old farmer, hears the news and offers a dismissive shrug. He lived through the Kaiser's War, recalls the hyperinflation of the 1920s that rendered his life savings insufficient to purchase a loaf of bread, remembers the chaotic Weimar era, and then witnessed Hitler's rise to power, which brought a semblance of stability, followed by yet another war. Now Hitler is dead, and another government will emerge. Life will proceed, or it will not. He has witnessed regime changes before, and is uncertain if this particular transition holds greater significance than any other. His 17-year-old grandson, who was scheduled to report for military service the following week, exhibits a contrasting reaction. He is consumed by both terror and relief in equal measure. Terror stems from the profound uncertainty of what lies ahead, while relief emanates from the possibility that he might be spared from dying. He has observed numerous young men from his village march off to war, with less than half ever returning. His closest friend perished in Normandy at 18 years of age last summer. Another companion lost both his legs in Italy. The news of Hitler's death implies a potential end to the killing. It offers the possibility of survival. This thought is tinged with guilt, as he has been indoctrinated his entire life to believe that dying for the fatherland is the ultimate honor. Yet he harbors no desire to die. He yearns to live. Hitler's demise grants him tacit permission to acknowledge this deeply personal aspiration. In the devastated cities, where the sheer scale of destruction dictates the prevailing sentiment, reactions are profoundly influenced by the pervasive ruins. Hamburg has endured relentless bombing campaigns since 1943, with 40% of the city reduced to rubble. In the cellar where Frau Richter uttered her terse, "Good," the individuals gathered around the radio have all suffered losses. Homes certainly have been destroyed. Most have lost loved ones. They have spent years in air raid shelters, listening to the piercing wail of sirens, feeling the very foundations of their buildings shake, and emerging to find their familiar streets transformed into alien-scarred landscapes.
They have extricated bodies from collapsed structures, endured days without sustenance, burned furniture for warmth during the brutal winters, and witnessed their city disintegrate piece by piece. For them, Hitler's death signifies the end of the individual who plunged them into this unparalleled catastrophe. Some feel a grim satisfaction, others a profound emptiness, and still others a searing anger that he perished in Berlin swiftly, while they are condemned to continue living amidst the desolation he wrought. Greta, a 43-year-old woman whose husband and both sons were lost in the war, listens to the announcement and believes he escaped too easily.
She must persevere, must somehow devise a means of survival in a city devoid of economic activity, lacking any infrastructure, and offering no discernible future. Hitler is deceased, but she must still awaken tomorrow in a city of rubble and undertake the arduous task of finding food. His death provides no solution to her plight. However, in the same cellar, Helga, a 22-year-old woman, experiences a flicker of nascent hope. She has eagerly awaited the war's conclusion so that she might finally commence her life. She longs for love, marriage, children. The ordinary experiences rendered impossible by 12 years of Nazi dominion and 6 years of relentless warfare. Hitler's demise signifies the potential to finally embark on this path. She harbors no thoughts of politics, guilt, or responsibility. Her focus is on the future, on the possibility of a life that may still unfold. This is not a naive perspective. It is a fundamental act of survival. She must cling to the belief in a future, or she cannot endure. The announcement reaches individuals at different junctures through various channels, and each person filters its import through the prism of their unique experiences. In a Munich hospital, a nurse informs a wounded soldier that Hitler is dead. The 24-year-old soldier, who has lost his right leg, poses a question that will echo through Germany for generations. What was it all for, then? He receives no answer. The nurse offers none. No one possesses a definitive response. On a road in Mecklenburg, within a column of refugees trudging westward, fleeing the advancing Soviet forces, the news disseminates from person to person. These are individuals who have forfeited everything. Their homes now lie behind Soviet lines, either occupied or reduced to ruins. They carry what little they could fit onto a cart or their backs. They have traversed many weeks, witnessing sights along this arduous journey that they will never articulate. They have seen individuals succumb to exhaustion, starvation, and utter despair. They have witnessed Soviet soldiers halting columns and forcibly selecting women. They have learned to avert their gaze when they hear of Hitler's death. Some weep, some laugh with bitter irony, and some remain silently numb. A woman in her 50s, laboriously pulling a cart laden with her remaining possessions, remarks to no one in particular, "He promised us greatness. He gave us this." She gestures vaguely at the stream of refugees, the desolate road, and the overarching sky. Nearby, a man accompanying his elderly mother murmurs, "Do not speak ill of the Führer." Even now, even in this dire situation, vestiges of belief persist. Or perhaps he is simply too profoundly weary to relinquish the conviction that had lent meaning to his suffering. This
is the inherent cruelty of the announcement. It arrives at a moment when Germany is too irrevocably shattered to mount a coherent response. Had Hitler's death occurred in 1942, when Germany still commanded dominion over much of Europe and victory seemed attainable, the reaction would have likely been one of shock, grief, and perhaps even renewed determination. Had it transpired in 1943, following the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad, there might have been a sense of relief, an intimation that perhaps another leader might have pursued a more pragmatic course to end the war. However, in May of 1945, with Germany already vanquished, with Soviet and American troops occupying the nation, with cities reduced to rubble and millions dead, Hitler's demise is merely another stock datum within an overwhelming deluge of grim realities. In Berlin, within the Führer bunker itself, where Hitler met his end, the remaining staff received the news prior to the official broadcast. Naturally, they were present. Some of them witnessed the body, and some claimed to have assisted in its cremation in the garden above.
These individuals, the staunch loyalists who remained with Hitler until the very end, experienced their own distinct reactions. Some chose to end their lives in the ensuing days. Others attempted to escape. Still others were apprehended by Soviet forces and endured years of imprisonment. Their responses to Hitler's death were profoundly shaped by their proximity to him, their complicity in his regime, and their understanding of their own implication in all that had transpired. However, the vast majority of Germans were not within the confines of the bunker. Most Germans were in cellars, in refugee convoys, and in occupied towns, striving to survive, attempting to make sense of a world that had imploded around them. For them, Hitler's death held significance not because of who he was as an individual, but because of what his demise represented: an ending. However, the nature of what was to follow remained terrifyingly obscure. In the days following the announcement, as the news permeated the populace and individuals gained the opportunity to process it, reactions began to evolve. Initial disbelief gradually yielded to acceptance. The pervasive numbness slowly gave way to an outpouring of emotion. While these emotions varied widely, some individuals felt a sense of liberation, others a profound sense of being lost, and many experienced a complex blend of both. In Hamburg, 3 days after the announcement, Frau Richter, who had uttered her laconic "good" in the cellar, attends church on the first Sunday following Hitler's death. The church is filled to capacity. The pastor delivers a sermon focusing on themes of forgiveness and societal rebuilding, conspicuously omitting any direct mention of Hitler. His discourse centers on abstract concepts of sin, redemption, and the imperative to look toward the future. Following the service, Frau Richter stands outside in the gentle spring sunshine, gazing at the shattered remnants of her city, and weeps for the first time since her son's passing. Her tears are not for Hitler, but for the totality of the devastation, for the immense waste and loss, and for the utter impossibility of ever finding rational meaning in it all. In Berlin, on May 3rd, Ruth Andreas Friedrich emerges from her apartment after the fighting in her district has ceased. Soviet soldiers now patrol the streets. She observes the red flag flying atop the Reichstag in the distance. She witnesses German soldiers, now prisoners of war, being marched away. She sees civilians tentatively emerging from their subterranean shelters, blinking in the unfamiliar light, beginning to assess the extent of the damage. Hitler is dead. The war is drawing to a close, yet the cityscape resembles nothing less
than the very end of the world. She writes in her diary, "We have survived. Now we must discover how to live." This sentiment becomes the dominant undercurrent in the weeks that follow, a turning inward towards survival, towards reconstruction, towards the future. Hitler's death marks the conclusion of one chapter, but the subsequent chapter is a blank, daunting expanse, pregnant with uncertainty. Germany in May of 1945 is a nation that requires rebuilding, both physically from its ruins and morally from the depths of its recent past. The announcement of Hitler's death signifies the moment when Germans tentatively begin to confront what they have endured and what they have enabled. However, in that initial instant on May 1st, as the news crackles through radios across a fragmented country, the reactions are as diverse and varied as the individuals who receive them. Relief mingles with grief, satisfaction with numbness, hope with despair, belief with disbelief.
Germany in May of 1945 is not a singular nation unified by a single emotional response. It is comprised of millions of individuals, each confronting their own reckoning in solitary confinement. In a cellar in Cologne, a man exclaims, "Thank God!" In a bunker in East Prussia, a soldier laments, "We are lost." In a farmhouse in Bavaria, a woman inquires, "What happens now?" In a refugee encampment, a child asks, "Who was Hitler?" In a prison cell, a resistance fighter declares, "Finally." In a hospital bed, a wounded veteran pronounces, "It was all for nothing." All of these reactions are valid. All of them occurred. Germany's response to Hitler's death cannot be distilled into a singular emotion or a solitary narrative. It was as fragmented and complex as the nation itself, as broken and contradictory as the regime that had just collapsed. The announcement concludes, "The war persists for another week. Soviet and American forces continue their advances. More lives are lost. Cities burn. Refugees flee. And in cellars, basements, and refugee columns across Germany, the profound silence of the announcement gives way to the cacophony of continued existence." Upon hearing the news of Hitler's demise, individuals retire for the night, only to confront the identical queries upon their awakening. How will we endure this day? How do we proceed? What course of action shall we take now? These are the very deliberations that will shape the destiny of Germany for generations to come. However, on the 1st of May 1945, in the immediate wake of this revelation, the vast majority of Germans are far too depleted, far too deeply wounded, and far too consumed by the pressing need for immediate subsistence to contemplate the distant future. They receive the tidings of the dictator's passing, experience their individual reactions, and then recommence the arduous task of remaining alive within a nation utterly devastated. The Führer is no more. The conflict is drawing to a close. The period of accountability is merely commencing.